making a movie physically and mentally destroys you. You know, it just does.
It becomes such a labor of love that sometimes we neglect to look at it as a business.
People lock into this idea that there is a correct way to do things. There's not. There's a million ways to do it.
Video has become the most effective way to get people to do something that it is you want them to do.
It's time for Filmmakers to Get Real with Jeffrey Michael Bays and Forris Day Jr.
That's right. This is the Get Real Indie Filmmakers podcast, the podcast that talks about indie film topics that other podcasts usually don't talk about.
Right.
Remember the Gaffer Tape show?
I do.
A long time ago we did that.
Yep. That was interesting.
Yeah, that's an example of doing something that nobody else does.
Yeah, and I have some pink gaffer tape. I actually bought the 5-pack of the fluorescent colors, and I've been putting the pink on certain tools at work because nobody will touch them with pink tape. And I'm like, these are mine. See the pink tape? And they're like, okay, Forris.
Oh, man. I can't believe we're still talking about that show.
I'm just saying the value of gaffer tape, it can change, especially with putting the pink on with all these tough guys around. They're like, I ain't touching his tools. He's got pink tape on it. Okay, it works. Gaffer tape to the rescue.
On upcoming shows, we're going to talk with Josh Friedman about his Crew Me Up app. And we're going to try to get Alex Ferrari back on. He has a new book out called The Rise of the Filmtrepreneur, and that sounds like it's going to be really good. And he's always a treat to talk to, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll try to get him on an upcoming show. And he was on our special show about Distributor, which, as we've been talking about, is a mess. But anyway,
everything works out. I remain. I mean, of course, I don't have a film in the mix, in the mess here, but I also remain optimistic that things will work out for people.
But on the show today is Steve Kaplan, the author of The Hidden Tools of Comedy, and he has a new book out. And what is the name of that book?
It's called The Comic Hero's Journey, Serious Story Structure for Fabulously Funny Films.
Okay, so if you have a film that is a comedy, it's probably a good idea to check this out because Steve knows what he's doing. He did the HBO Writers Program as well as HBO's Workspace Program, and he teaches comedy intensives all across the world. In fact, he just taught an intensive in Russia.
He travels the world teaching comedy because comedy is universal, but not that he teaches comedy, but he teaches comedy structure, how you can put it into your films.
So what are you going to ask him when he gets on the show?
You know I never plan. And I'll try to avoid certain phrases, but that you don't like tell me about the book, but I probably will ask him, tell me about the book.
Now, is this going to be a funny interview? Since it's about comedy?
My interviews are always very serious.
Because I know Steve is a pretty funny guy. I've met him a few times. And, he's quick-witted. Surprisingly, he doesn't do stand-up. But I'm just wondering, is this going to be a serious interview?
It's going to be serious because I want people to listen to it and learn. Okay. It's not going to be like, hey, let's see who can out-funny the other guy. It's never like that. It's like, I go into these interviews, what can I bring to the listener, and what questions would the listener want to ask this person, in this case, Steve? What would they want to learn from this person? So I try to think of all of that, and basically I just listen to what people are saying and expand upon it. So that's my format. Now it's out there.
Okay.
Maybe I ought to write a book on it.
So let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Steve Kaplan, author of The Comic Hero's Journey, right after this.
That's one thing Alfred Hitchcock was really good at, creating suspense with a camera. For the last couple of years, I've been teaching Hitchcock suspense techniques at festivals like Buffalo, St. Louis, Palm Springs, Los Angeles. Filmmakers are learning easy tricks for building suspense that are so easy to implement. Now there's a way for you to get access in my new book, Suspense with a Camera. It's available in bookstores now. And don't miss our free docuseries on YouTube called Hitch 20.
introduction to our Hitch 20 series, the rendition of the Funeral March of a Marionette by Radoslav Drakovic, the original theme to Alfred Hitchcock Presents. We're joined now by the great comedy expert, Steve Kaplan. He is the film industry's most sought-after expert on comedy.
Next to me. Not.
He advises DreamWorks, Disney, HBO, Paramount, among others. And he created the HBO New Writers Program as well as HBO's Workspace. Steve has taught at UCLA, NYU, and Yale. And he also wrote a book. He wrote 2 books, The Hidden Tools of Comedy, The Serious Business of Being Funny, and The Hero's Journey, which...
the comic hero's journey.
What did I say?
You said the hero's journey. It's the comic heroes, because there's a book called The Hero's Journey.
Oh, yeah.
This is the comic hero's journey. Steve, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
My pleasure.
So you're pretty much an expert on comedy, I would say. So
I try to be.
Try
to keep up on trends.
So we've talked about the book. So now we're going to pick your brain a little bit today. We want to talk about some topics on comedy. And you and I were talking off air. We're talking about political correctness in comedy and the cancel culture. Let's delve into that. First of all, what is cancel culture?
Well, cancel culture is when somebody has transgressed, has misstepped, and the thought is that they should go away. And the question is, for how long? For forever? For a week? So there's the sense that, for instance, in the world of comedy, Louis C.K. Has been banished, if it were. He's doing these small sets in small clubs, and one of his opening lines is, "I lost $36 million in 20 minutes," which is funny, but it also makes him the victim. And I think cancel culture has a point. In other words, should we burn all the films of Woody Allen because some people feel uncomfortable with him or feel that he in the past did something bad? And so cancel culture isn't saying, I think cancel culture isn't saying you can never watch a Woody Allen film, you can never enjoy a Woody Allen film, but you have to make an educated choice based on, do you want to support this? Where do you feel, you're not going to stop somebody else, but you can make your own educated individual choice. Are you going to go see a Mel Gibson movie? So there's a danger in cancel culture in terms of people are given a forever timeout. But I think that before you can come back into the good graces of society, you have to own up to what you did. And I think that's the point that a lot of people are making in terms of people like Charlie Rose, like Louis C.K., that you can't just come back as though you stepped on somebody's toe or you ran a red light. What they did requires some amount of reflection and a large amount of owning up to it. I was talking to my friend John Fugelsang the other night, and John is a very funny commentator and comic, and his point was that he could get Louis C.K. out on the road tomorrow if Louis C.K. would let the 3 women whose careers were stopped, damaged by his manager kind of putting the kibosh on them. Let those 3 women comics, let them open up for him. and then he can do the second act. But his second act has to include an acknowledgement of what he did, where he is, where he was, and what he's doing now. Which, if you've read anything about his new sets, he kind of doesn't mention it at all. And when he does mention it, it is to the point of he's the victim. He's the victim here.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of not the victim. He's kind of he was kind of the perpetrator. Great comedians have always owned up to what was going on with them and with them in terms of the context of their community and their society. For instance, Richard Pryor famously was freebasing and set himself on fire.
Yeah.
And ran down the road on fire. And when he recovered enough to do his next stand-up set, that was one of the basic points he was making. He didn't try to make excuses for it. He didn't try to point the blame somewhere else. He owned it. He said, there's this, I think he used the N-word, there's this N-word running down the street on fire. And I'm not going to do his act right now, but I think that's what people have to do. They have to own where they were and what they're doing, and accept the fact that they need to do more than simply say I'm sorry and then go back to where they were. They're not going to be allowed to go back to where they were. And some people are not going to be allowed to go back to where they were because they're going to be in jail, or they should be in jail. Mm-hmm. In fact, Bill Cosby is in jail. So, correct. And more people will be in jail. So cancel culture is the thing that I think can be misused if people are using it for partisan political ends. Kathy Griffin makes a joke of a picture, and she's literally hounded off the stage, and she has to go into hiding. That's I think a problem, because no one is really having a problem with her comedy as much as her politics. The same way that I guess the Dixie Chicks were kind of hounded out of their career by people who were upset that they had said something bad about George Bush. I'm trying to think of a similar thing on the left, and there probably is examples of that, but it's not coming to me right now.
No, but I get your point. You anything, it's to the point now where anything that offends, people are willing to shut that person off. And granted, some of it's very illegal. Obviously Bill Cosby, in the TV world, Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman right now, because of what they did, all of a sudden, they're no longer welcome on TV, and it was certainly illegal. But now, where do you draw the line when using the Dixie Chicks because of their political views, and people wouldn't listen to them? I, by the way, love their music, so I would continue to listen to it, whether I agree with them or not. But yes, I can see where it's gotten worse. What is your opinion on how social media has changed the way, go back 10, 15 years and today? It seems more instantaneous to me, but what's your opinions on social media creating this cancel culture?
It's a genie we let out of the bottle, and we really don't know what it is or how to put it back or how powerful it is. I mean, back in the day, if you wanted to hound the monster out of the village, you had to get out of your house, grab a torch, light it, and go to the mad scientist's lair and say, "Out with you, monster!" And now you don't have to do it. You can be sitting in your jammies or your skivvies, and you can get online and you can make people's lives not only hard, but you can endanger them, because there are unhinged people out there, and not everything that you say in an exaggerated way is taken in an exaggerated way. Now, if you claim that people are running a child pedophile ring out of the basement of a Washington, D.C. pizza shop, some guy could show up there having driven 12 hours or 20 hours with a rifle to free the kids, even though in that pizza shop there is no basement. So the internet was supposed to make us smarter, but I think it's made us stupider. And I think it's spread stupid all the way throughout, so that people read something or see something and they simply, if it fits in with their mindset, the mindset that they come in with, if it fits in with their mindset, they just go off on it. And that's dangerous, and that happens on both sides of the aisle. That if somebody said, I saw Trump's tax returns, and he's in bed with the Yakuza, and there are people who will believe it no matter what, because they kind of want to believe that, so they will believe that. Right. And we live in a time in which these huge media conglomerates that are in charge of the social media are amoral, and they will do anything for profit, including diluting the national conversation, so that you have Facebook. Up until a couple of weeks ago, they had a terms of service which said you cannot knowingly have an ad that has falsehood in it. Now, we know that they were attacked during the 2016 election, and lots of articles with fake news. I hate to use that term, but that's lots of articles were kind of disseminated and targeted. But now that they were caught, now what they did was they simply changed their terms of service. So now you can put in an ad in which you basically can say that Ted Cruz's father killed Kennedy, and it's all right. So it's a real problem. I mean, social media is a real problem when you have a way of communicating with people who are friends or supporters or fans. I'm thinking of Leslie Jones. Leslie Jones is acting in a movie. She's just a comedian. She's just an actress. She's not hurting anybody. She's not ruining anybody's life. And I think it was Milo. I could be wrong about this. Please, I apologize if I'm spreading a fake piece of news, but I think it was Milo, or somebody like that, who decided to gang up on her. And this guy, who may or may not be Milo, and his thousands and thousands of Twitter followers just spewed horrible, derogatory, profane garbage at her, enough to chase her off the platform. So that's the problem with social media, is that you no longer have to get out of your house and get your torch. Now thousands, tens of thousands of people can gang up on somebody, and they can dox them. And dox is when you reveal private information on a social media. So the woman who accused Kavanaugh a sexual assault when they were in high school, she had to leave her house. She had for her own safety. So that's and how did anybody find out where she lives? Because people figured it out. The internet is this great tool to. I thought, people thought, oh, this will make us smart, but no, it's actually making us dumb and mean. And she had to leave the house. So social media is a problem. It's like an automobile. An automobile is a great tool, except if it runs you over.
How do you think it's going to affect like future comedians and or someone writing a comedy film? How deeply do they got to think about political correctness and just what they put into that script or what they put into their stand-up act or even a comedy commercial? I believe can, people look at everything comedy now and they look for something to be offended with. How do you think the creative types have to think about things nowadays?
Well, actually, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and I'm going to first read you a list. This comic this British comic read this list that supposedly he had been given a checklist of things that he wasn't supposed to mention or talk about or hit on if he did this college performance. The list is these were the off-topic topics. You could not talk. You could not mention these topics or have a joke about these topics. Racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, anti-religion, anti-atheism, and all jokes had to be respectful and kind. And so his point was that the PC culture had ruined comedy. And in fact, that's what Todd Phillips, the director of Joker, has said. Todd Phillips famously did the Hangover movies, and he did another movie with Will Ferrell. It was another very successful movie. The name just pops out of my head. And his point was that he had to leave comedy because you weren't able to be funny with all these restrictions. But here's what I believe, and I'm quoting Mark Maron now. Mark Maron says, the only thing that's off the table is shamelessly punching down for the sheer joy of hurting people. And I agree with that. People are still funny. People still can be funny. You can still do edgy material. What you have to do, though, is accept the fact that if you are going to offend some people, you're going to offend some people, and then move along and get on with it. Right. Because you can't do comedy based upon the fact that you're going to avoid offending people. Some people are going to be offended. Some people are always going to be offended, but you don't want to be punching down, meaning you don't want to make fun of people who are powerless, because the whole point of comedy is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
And I agree with that. Don't, I don't like mean comedy. I call that mean comedy because it's easy. Oh, I can go up there and make fun of somebody. That's, you see comedians who can pull it off. Like Howie Mandel used to pull it off, but in a good way. He'd pick like, what do you do? What do you do for a job? I don't know if his older, I'm going back, 20 some odd years ago, his acts would be a little bit like formatted, but then he'd go to the audience and he'd pick on someone in the audience, but it was never really mean. It was always funny. And he had a great way of doing it.
So what do you do? And they would say nothing. And he would say, so how do you know when you're finished?
Yeah, exactly. And he was never mean. And I like that kind of comedy.
But Howie Mandel, first and foremost, made fun of himself. Because he would say something, people would laugh, and he would go, what? As though he didn't get the joke.
Yep. Yep. So I always liked his comedy. Now, one of the newer comedians, and this goes right along with what you were saying, Bob Marley. He's a Boston based. I believe he's out of Boston. I just went and saw him in Pittsfield, Mass, and he was so funny. But the way he made things funny, well, first of all, he's got that accent, kind of the Boston accent. But he was funny because he just told stories, and he didn't really, he might have picked on himself a little bit, but it's the way he delivered things. And a good comedian, I still think you can be funny nowadays, but certainly people will be offended by, oh, you're picking on your wife. He talks about his wife and his family, whatever. But I believe there are comedians out there who can still pull it off, but they got to be really seasoned. I think new comedians are going to have a hard time with it. And new screenwriters are going to struggle with it. And even veteran screenwriters are going to struggle with this cancel culture, as you call it. And
I'm not so sure, because if you look at movies and television, if you look at Fleabag, if you look at Family Guy, South, those people are still making fun, coming up, pushing the envelope, coming up to the line, crossing the line, and letting the chips fall where they may, and not worrying so much about, somebody will not like this. We live in a very fragmented society, in a fragmented time, and you're going to have, if you're successful, you're going to have a niche audience at best.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the thing to do is to make sure that you know what your target of comedy is. And the target should start with yourself. It should start with yourself. When you're if you're a stand-up, if you're making a joke about your wife or your girlfriend, your focus really is, I'm the jerk who's with her. I'm the schmo who is hooked up with her. So even though it seems like you're making mother-in-law jokes, you're making wife jokes, you're really making a joke about yourself, because you're the person who's in that situation, no one else. And I think that you can still create comedy without having to water it down. But also, as Mark Maron says, if what gives you joy is hurting people, well, maybe there's an audience for you as well, but that doesn't mean that we have to like it or we have to support it.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I agree with that 100%. I was never one who liked really cruel comedy. Some people love it. I believe new guys, like somebody who just wants to get into comedy, you've really got to really think about what you're going to do. Or I don't know. I just think it's harder now to get into the circuit without being crushed before you ever get started.
Well, I think that's all. I think that's not new, actually. I think it's always been tough. There was a time in the 80s when the comedy scene exploded, when people who had 3 minutes of good material and 17 minutes of okay material could actually go on the road and make something of a mediocre living. But that was a very short amount of time. Before then, comics were working for free and they were starving. After then, only the top comics could make a living at it. And many stand-ups had to just go get other jobs. Now, many of them got other jobs within the industry as writers or as performers. But I think that's always been true, that it's hard to break into because you have to dedicate yourself to it. And there's a lot of failure. I mean, let's look at two of the most famous failures as stand-ups, Judd Apatow and Larry David. They were both total failures. They had great ideas, great material. They did not have good delivery systems, if you were to believe the audiences of those times. But they figured out a way to share their point of view, share their comedy, even though they weren't good stand-up. So I think it's always been a tough go. But I think that if you know what your focus is, and you have something to say, not just a collection of jokes, then you can carve out a space for yourself in the world. Let's take a look at the show that won all the Emmys at this past Emmys, Fleabag. Was she famous 3 years ago? No, 3 years ago, she was an unknown actor, comic, writer. And what she did was she wrote this show and she took it to the Edinburgh Festival. And that's where they saw her. And that's where it all started. So you have to have a point of view. You have to have your own voice. You have to have a sense of what you want to talk about. And basically, you're talking about yourself, your family, your world, your point of view. And then you have to take your shot. And some people will, a lot of people go to Edinburgh and don't get Netflix sitcoms, but some people do. So you just have to take your shot and do the best. And the only way to do it is to get up and fail until you don't.
Mm-hmm. I like that line. I used that on somebody the other day. Fail till you don't. I love that. That's.
I mean, you have to figure out a way to eat and have a roof over your head while you're failing. But as long as you've got that part figured out, then go for it.
Yeah. Just because you failed doesn't mean you failed. So you just failed once, but you got, you may have to fail a few times. Awesome advice, Steve. Why don't we plug your website and your books before we wrap?
Okay, my website is Kaplan Comedy, KaplanComedy, KaplanComedy.com. And there you can find out about our live events. We're doing a 2-day workshop in Los Angeles in the first weekend in March. And also on my website, you can find out about my 2 books, The Hidden Tools of Comedy, which tells you what comedy is, why it works, how it works, and what's happening when it's not working and what you can do to fix it. And then The Comic Hero's Journey, which is taking a look at filmmaking, screenwriting from the comic writer's point of view. And how would that be different than the normal hero's journey? And also on the website, you can get in touch with me, ask me questions, and we do script consultations and all that good stuff.
That's awesome that people can get a hold of you and that you're so open to speaking with people. So check that out. Check the books out. I have them both here in my hand. And we got to have you on again, Steve, because we still have topics that we have to cover. So,
that's right.
All right. We're going to do that. I want to thank you for joining me today. Great conversation. You're always a wealth of information. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, that's our show for today. Get Real Indie Filmmakers is created by Forris Day Jr., also the host of Rolling Tape on YouTube. And Forris, you also narrate audiobooks on Audible.
That's correct. Look for Forris Day Jr. on your Audible app, and you'll find all the wonderful and not so wonderful books that I've done. And it's also hosted by you, Jeffrey Michael Bays. Jeffrey is
the podcast is
the podcast. Yeah. Yes, you and I co-host this podcast. Now, folks, I'm explaining this to Jeffrey now, so just speak amongst yourselves, and I'll explain it to Jeffrey. But Jeffrey, who hosts this podcast with me, is also the author of 2 books, Between the Scenes, what every film director, writer, and editor should know about scene transitions, and his latest, greatest, newest book, Suspense with a Camera, A Filmmaker's Guide to Hitchcock's Techniques.
Get Real Indie Filmmakers is a production of Borges Networks, 2019.